In a world where appearances often overshadow substance, where social media profiles become stages for exaggerated realities, and where words flow effortlessly but actions rarely align with them, the philosophy of Stoicism reemerges as a powerful reminder of what true dignity entails. For the Stoics, dignity was not a performance, nor was it a tool to gain approval from others. It was, instead, a deep-rooted internal virtue and an alignment of one's actions, intentions, and values. It wasn't about dressing a certain way, speaking in a certain tone, or acquiring validation from external sources. True dignity, according to Stoic wisdom, stems from how we carry ourselves in our daily lives, especially when no one is watching. It's about maintaining an unwavering commitment to personal integrity, even when the circumstances around us test our resolve. Imagine walking into a crowded cafe. At one table sits a person adorned in expensive clothing, surrounded by luxury accessories, and speaking with an air of confidence designed to command attention. Every movement is carefully calculated to leave an impression. At another table sits someone in simple attire, calm and composed, sipping their drink without any apparent need to be noticed. Their words, when spoken, are thoughtful and deliberate. There's no sense of performance, no hidden agenda, just an air of quiet strength and authenticity. It's the second person who leaves a more profound impression because their dignity isn't constructed, it's lived. Stoicism teaches us that dignity is not about seeking attention, but about commanding respect through consistency, humility, and self-respect. For the Stoics, dignity begins with self-awareness. It requires recognizing that every moment, every interaction, and every decision is an opportunity to reflect our inner values. Marcus Aurelius, one of the great Stoic philosophers, reminded himself often to act as though he were being observed by a wise teacher. Not because he feared judgment, but because he understood that dignity stems from acting in alignment with one's principles, regardless of who is or isn't watching. This perspective transforms even the most mundane tasks, greeting a stranger, honoring a commitment, responding to criticism, into acts of character. True dignity, therefore, is not a performance but a habit, cultivated day by day in both grand gestures and small, seemingly insignificant choices. Another essential aspect of Stoic dignity is understanding where to invest our energy. In the modern world, much of our emotional energy is wasted trying to impress people who, in reality, have little to no meaningful impact on our lives. We dress for approval, we speak for applause, and we act for validation. The Stoics viewed this as a futile pursuit. Epictetus taught that we must discern what is within our control and what is not, and other people's opinions, reactions, and judgments fall squarely into the category of the uncontrollable. True dignity, then, arises when we free ourselves from the shackles of external validation and focus instead on living in alignment with our inner values. This is not to suggest that appearance and self-presentation are entirely irrelevant. The Stoics didn't advocate for neglecting how we carry ourselves, but they emphasized that these external aspects should be reflections of our inner character, not tools for manipulation or superficial approval. A person who speaks with dignity doesn't do so to dominate a conversation, but to bring clarity and honesty to it. A person who carries themselves with dignity doesn't do so to attract admiration, but to remain true to their own sense of self-respect. In this sense, dignity becomes less about how others perceive us and more about how we perceive ourselves when we're alone with our thoughts. Dignity also manifests in how we respond to challenges and adversity. Life, as the Stoics often reminded us, is unpredictable. Circumstances can change in an instant, wealth can be lost, relationships can end, and plans can unravel. In these moments, it's easy to lose one's composure, to react impulsively, or to fall into self-pity. But the Stoic approach to dignity emphasizes remaining steady, even when the world feels chaotic. Seneca wrote extensively about the importance of remaining calm under pressure, of refusing to let external circumstances dictate one's inner state. True dignity shines brightest not in moments of success, but in moments of difficulty, when one chooses to face hardship with grace, courage, and resilience. In relationships, dignity is equally essential. It's not just about how we present ourselves to others, but also about how we treat them. A Stoic carries themselves with respect not just because it's the right thing to do, but because every interaction is an opportunity to practice virtue. Dignity means listening without interrupting, speaking without arrogance, and setting boundaries without aggression. It means recognizing one's worth and refusing to compromise it for temporary approval or fleeting admiration. This extends to how we allow others to treat us as well. If someone disrespects us, the Stoic response isn't to retaliate with anger, but to calmly assert boundaries. Dignity doesn't demand confrontation, it simply refuses to be diminished by disrespect. Moreover, dignity also involves treating oneself with respect. How we speak to ourselves internally, how we care for our physical and mental health, and how we honor our own commitments all reflect our sense of dignity. A person who respects themselves will not tolerate environments, relationships, or habits that erode their self-worth. Stoicism teaches us to guard our inner citadel, the mind, with vigilance. It's a sacred space where dignity is both cultivated and preserved. Allowing toxic relationships, harmful habits, or self-deprecating thoughts to linger is a betrayal of this principle. In our interactions with the world, Stoic dignity is revealed in how we respond to praise and criticism alike. Compliments should not inflate our ego, just as insults should not shatter our confidence. The Stoic remains steady, understanding that external validation or criticism is fleeting and often superficial. True dignity doesn't waver in the face of applause, nor does it crumble under attack. It remains anchored in self-awareness, self-respect, and an unwavering commitment to personal values. In essence, Stoic dignity isn't loud or performative. It doesn't demand attention or validation. It exists quietly, consistently, and resolutely. It is expressed in the calm confidence of someone who knows their worth, in the steady composure of someone who refuses to be swayed by fleeting opinions, and in the unshakable resolve of someone who acts in alignment with their principles. In a world that often confuses noise for significance and appearance for substance, the Stoic approach to dignity serves as a powerful reminder that true value comes not from being seen or heard, but from being unwaveringly authentic. It's a lesson that transcends time, a principle that remains as relevant today as it was in ancient Rome. Dignity is not what we show the world, it's how we carry ourselves when no one is watching. In an era dominated by instant gratification, emotional outbursts, and impulsive reactions, self-control emerges not merely as a virtue but as a necessity for navigating life with clarity and purpose. The Stoics, centuries ago, identified self-control as one of the pillars of a well-lived life, a skill that separates the wise from the reckless, the composed from the chaotic, and the deliberate from the reactive. At its core, self-control isn't about suppressing emotions or pretending they don't exist. It's about understanding them, channeling them, and preventing them from dictating our actions. For the Stoics, self-control was not seen as a restriction but as a form of liberation, a mastery of the self that allows one to respond rather than react, to act with intention rather than impulse. Imagine standing in the middle of a heated argument. Your heart races, your breathing quickens, and your mind floods with thoughts you might later regret voicing. In moments like these, self-control becomes the thin line between escalation and resolution, between deepening a conflict and dissolving it. For the Stoic, the key lies in creating a pause, a brief space between stimulus and response where reason can take control. Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, often reminded himself to take a step back and observe his emotions rather than becoming enslaved by them. He understood that emotions, left unchecked, can lead to words and actions that create damage far beyond the initial spark of anger or frustration. Self-control is not about denying our feelings, but about placing them in their proper context. Anger, fear, sadness, and excitement are natural parts of the human experience. The Stoic does not seek to eliminate these emotions, but to prevent them from taking control of their reasoning faculties. Epictetus taught that while we cannot always control the initial wave of emotion that washes over us, we can always control how we react to it. This distinction is critical. A sudden feeling of anger might arise uninvited, but the decision to shout, insult, or act aggressively is entirely within our control. Self-control is about recognizing this power and exercising it consistently. In practical terms, self-control manifests in countless daily situations. It's the ability to resist the urge to respond to an insult with another insult. It's the discipline to say no to distractions when you've committed to a task. It's the patience to listen before speaking, the humility to admit when you're wrong, and the restraint to walk away from unnecessary conflict. In a world where emotional reactivity is often celebrated as authenticity, the Stoic approach to self-control reminds us that true strength lies in the ability to remain composed under pressure. This does not mean the Stoic becomes emotionless or indifferent. On the contrary, self-control allows us to experience emotions more fully because we are not constantly at their mercy. When we are no longer swept away by every fleeting feeling, we can engage with our emotions in a healthier, more balanced way. Fear, for example, can become a teacher rather than a tyrant. Anger can become a signal rather than an explosion. Sadness can become a space for reflection rather than a pit of despair. The Stoic uses self-control to process these emotions, learn from them, and then respond in a way that aligns with their values. In relationships, self-control plays an equally vital role. Many conflicts, both personal and professional, arise not from genuine disagreements but from poorly managed emotions. A harsh word spoken in anger, a door slammed in frustration, or an email sent in haste can cause damage far beyond what was intended. The Stoic approach to self-control emphasizes creating space for reflection before reacting. This space doesn't require hours of meditation. It can be as brief as a single deep breath, a momentary pause, or a mental reminder of your values. In these small moments of self-awareness, self-control transforms potential chaos into composed action. Furthermore, self-control isn't limited to emotional reactions. It also extends to our desires and impulses. In a society driven by consumerism, where instant gratification is just a click away, the ability to delay satisfaction has become increasingly rare. Whether it's resisting the temptation to overspend, sticking to a diet, or avoiding mindless scrolling on social media, self-control acts as an anchor that keeps us grounded in our long-term goals. Seneca observed that indulgence often leads to dependence, while self-restraint leads to freedom. The ability to say no to momentary pleasure is not an act of deprivation but an affirmation of one's commitment to a higher purpose. Self-control also guards us against the manipulation of others. Those who lack control over their emotions and desires are easily swayed by persuasive advertisements, charismatic leaders, or even the opinions of strangers. A Stoic, grounded in self-control, becomes far less susceptible to these external forces. They are not driven by envy when someone else succeeds, nor are they paralyzed by fear when faced with uncertainty. Their actions are not dictated by external pressures but by internal principles. It's important to recognize that self-control is not something we master overnight. It's a skill, and like any skill, it requires practice, patience, and persistence. Every moment of temptation, every surge of anger, and every impulse to react impulsively presents an opportunity to strengthen our self-control. These moments are not failures, they are training grounds. Each time we choose restraint over recklessness, we reinforce the neural pathways that make self-control easier in the future. In essence, self-control is one of the most profound expressions of personal freedom. It allows us to navigate life's challenges without being ruled by fleeting emotions or desires. It protects our relationships, strengthens our resolve, and sharpens our focus. The Stoics understood that without self-control, all other virtues become fragile. Wisdom, courage, and justice all depend on our ability to act with intention rather than impulse. In a world that rewards immediacy, celebrates emotional spectacle, and encourages indulgence at every turn, self-control becomes a revolutionary act. It's not about denying ourselves joy or pleasure. It's about ensuring that our joy is not overshadowed by regret, and our pleasure does not come at the expense of our integrity. Self-control, then, is not a cage but a key to living with clarity, resilience, and, above all, dignity. It is the silent strength behind calm words, deliberate actions, and a life lived in harmony with one's deepest values. For the Stoic, self-control isn't just a virtue, it's a way of being. In a world increasingly defined by blurred lines between work and rest, between personal and professional spaces, and between genuine connection and superficial interaction, the concept of boundaries has never been more critical. For the Stoics, boundaries were not just practical tools for managing relationships and responsibilities. They were a reflection of self-respect, a silent declaration of one's values and limits. Establishing boundaries was not seen as an act of exclusion or hostility, but as a profound commitment to preserving one's mental clarity, emotional balance, and inner peace. In essence, boundaries are the invisible walls that protect our most valuable resource, ourselves. At the core of Stoic philosophy lies the principle of discernment, knowing what belongs to you and what does not. Epictetus reminds us that we cannot control other people's behavior, but we can control how we allow their behavior to affect us. Boundaries, therefore, are not about controlling others, but about defining the space where our influence ends and where we refuse to let external forces disrupt our internal equilibrium. This understanding serves as a foundation for every boundary we set. Whether it's saying no to unreasonable demands, stepping away from toxic relationships, or protecting our time from being monopolized by trivial pursuits. The modern world, with its endless notifications, emails, and social media interactions, constantly demands our attention. Without clear boundaries, we risk becoming prisoners of external expectations, sacrificing our well-being in the name of productivity, social validation, or misplaced loyalty. The Stoic approach reminds us that every yes we give to something external is, by default, a no to something internal, whether it's time for rest, reflection, or personal growth. Therefore, setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's an act of self-preservation. It's about recognizing that our time, energy, and attention are finite resources and must be allocated with care and intention. Boundaries also play an essential role in our relationships. While love, friendship, and camaraderie are celebrated in Stoic thought, they are not exempt from the principle of balance. True love, whether romantic, familial, or platonic, thrives when both parties respect each other's autonomy and space. Without boundaries, relationships can quickly turn into emotional battlegrounds, spaces where resentment festers, expectations go unmet, and conflicts arise from unspoken frustrations. The Stoic understands that saying no is sometimes the most loving thing one can do. It prevents the slow erosion of respect that often follows unchecked sacrifice or silent compliance. There's an important distinction to make here. Boundaries are not walls. They are not barriers designed to isolate or alienate others. Instead, they are doors that we control, determining who enters, when they enter, and how far they are allowed to go. Seneca, in his reflections on friendships, emphasized the importance of discernment in allowing others into our inner world. Not everyone deserves unlimited access to our time, thoughts, or emotions. Granting such access indiscriminately is not an act of kindness, it's an act of negligence toward oneself. However, establishing boundaries is not always comfortable. It often requires confronting people who may not respect them, dealing with guilt for saying no, or facing the fear of being perceived as selfish or unkind. Yet, the Stoic mindset offers a powerful antidote to these emotional barriers: clarity of purpose. When our values are clear and our priorities are well-defined, boundaries become easier to set and defend. If someone reacts poorly to a boundary we've set, it's a reflection of their expectations, not our integrity. The Stoic learns to let go of the need to please everyone, understanding that true peace cannot coexist with constant self-sacrifice. Boundaries also extend beyond interpersonal relationships. They apply to how we manage our commitments, responsibilities, and even our internal dialogue. How often do we overcommit to projects, events, or obligations out of fear of disappointing others? How frequently do we allow self-criticism and doubt to occupy our mental space rent-free? The Stoic approach teaches us to guard not only our physical time but also our mental energy. Saying no to external demands is one form of setting boundaries, but saying no to our own destructive thoughts is equally important. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself to protect his mind from unnecessary turmoil, treating his inner world as a sacred space that deserved respect and care. The concept of boundaries also intersects with the Stoic idea of justice. Justice, in Stoic terms, is not only about fairness toward others, but also about fairness toward oneself. Allowing others to consistently overstep our boundaries is not an act of kindness. It's an act of injustice against our own well-being. Likewise, imposing ourselves excessively on others, demanding more of them than they can reasonably give, is also an injustice. The balance lies in mutual respect, a space where both parties recognize and honor each other's limits without resentment or coercion. It's important to understand that boundaries are not static. They evolve with time, relationships, and personal growth. What felt acceptable a year ago might no longer feel appropriate today. The Stoic remains adaptable, reassessing their boundaries periodically and making adjustments as needed. This adaptability doesn't signify weakness, but wisdom, a recognition that growth often requires recalibration. In a society that often glorifies busyness, self-sacrifice, and constant availability, setting boundaries can feel like an act of rebellion. But from the Stoic perspective, it's not rebellion, it's wisdom in action. It's the ability to recognize that your time, energy, and attention are sacred resources that deserve to be protected. It's the courage to prioritize your well-being without guilt and to understand that saying no to one thing often means saying yes to something far more meaningful. Ultimately, boundaries are not just about self-protection, they're about self-respect. They are declarations of how we expect to be treated by others and by ourselves. They are reminders that we are the gatekeepers of our own lives, responsible for determining what enters and what remains outside. The Stoic understands that living without boundaries is not living freely, it's living chaotically, at the mercy of external demands and fleeting emotions. Boundaries, therefore, are not barriers to connection. They are the foundation upon which meaningful relationships, focused work, and a balanced life are built. For the Stoic, establishing boundaries isn't an optional practice. It's a fundamental requirement for living a life of purpose, integrity, and inner peace. Without boundaries, dignity becomes fragile, self-control erodes, and relationships suffer. With them, however, life gains clarity, relationships deepen, and the self is honored as the valuable and irreplaceable resource that it truly is. In this light, boundaries are not simply lines drawn in the sand. They are expressions of self-worth, acts of wisdom, and, ultimately, reflections of true inner strength. In a world driven by comparisons, metrics, and external validation, the concept of self-worth has become increasingly fragile. Social media platforms bombard us with carefully curated snapshots of other people's lives, achievements, and possessions. Advertisements relentlessly whisper that happiness lies in buying more, achieving more, and being more. Amidst this noise, Stoicism emerges as a timeless guide, offering clarity about where true self-worth originates, not from external achievements, fleeting praise, or societal validation, but from an unwavering understanding of one's intrinsic value. For the Stoics, self-worth wasn't something earned or proven. It was something recognized and protected. At the heart of Stoic philosophy lies the understanding that every individual possesses an inherent worth, one that exists independently of wealth, status, appearance, or social approval. Epictetus emphasized that our worth is not determined by what happens to us or what others think of us, but by how we respond to the world and whether we remain aligned with our principles.